The Poor Man and His Princess, written and illustrated by Mark Martinez. A long time ago, when kingdoms were still growing, there lived a poor man. He lived all alone in his hut just west of the rice fields and north of the okra. This man was indeed quite poor and lived in a short, small hut made of stone, mud, and grass. Considering its size and the materials from which it was made, it was a rather strong home with which the man was content. In it, the poor man had only one stool and a mat to sleep on, which was his bed. He also had a small stack of old books that he had found abandoned in the marketplace in a nearby village. The man kept the inside of his home very clean as well. Outside, the man had a small plot of sokoyokoto and a small well. Although it was very little, the man had just enough to sustain himself. It was without a doubt a poor man's home. Still, this poor man was quite grateful for what he had been given. The man was alone. No one really bothered him because he really had nothing to offer. Although he was quite intelligent and kind, he preferred to be alone, which eventually resulted in the local villagers treating him as an outcast. They simply could not understand why he was such a solitary man, so they would make up stories about him. Regardless of what the man's true story was, he lived well with what little was given to him on earth, and he appreciated it. One evening, while the man slept, there was a noise outside his hut. At first, the man ignored the noise, thinking that it was just the wind. Then there was another loud noise that finally woke the man completely. The man went outside to investigate, and he saw nothing. He then went back inside. He heard the noise again, but the noise did not really concern him because there was never any dangerous animals in the area, and people never really bothered him. He simply disregarded the noise as a wandering monkey or birds. He then heard the noise again, but this time the noise was much louder. When he went outside again and looked around, he could not find anything that could be making the noise that he heard. Then, when he walked around the hut, he heard footsteps. When he heard the footsteps, he walked around the hut to follow them. As he walked faster, he heard the footsteps move faster. The faster he walked, the faster the footsteps he heard became. He then began to run and saw a shadow. He began to chase a shadow. When he began to chase a shadow, he heard a giggle. The man then stopped. He heard the giggle again. He then began to chase the small shadow again and heard the laughter and scream of a child. It was the sound of a child who was playing. Finally, he stopped and ran the other way, tricking whoever it was. When the man grabbed who or whatever it was he was chasing, it let out a high-pitched scream and laugh. The man immediately discovered that the shadow he had been chasing was actually of a little girl. He could not believe it. Why would a little girl be out here, the man thought, and where are her parents? The man began to look around. He walked for some distance around his home, but could not find anyone. He walked further and further away from his home and finally realized that there was no one. The man became very tired and noticed the child getting tired as well. He then decided that he would continue his search in the morning. When they returned to the hut, the little girl immediately walked over to the man's bed and laid down. The man became a bit irritated, telling the child that that was his bed, but the child fell fast asleep, leaving the man without a place to lay. Tired and choosing not to awaken the child, the man found an old cloth, rolled it up, and rested his head on it and lay down on the floor. The next morning, the man took the child to the nearby village to see if anyone would recognize her. From one market to the next, the man asked if anyone recognized the child, but he was unsuccessful. The man and child were even pushed out of some market areas because he was not purchasing or trading anything. The man walked the child around asking if anyone knew her. He even thought that someone would take her even if she was not theirs, but no one did. When it became late, the man took the little girl home to his hut and thought that he would continue looking again in the morning. She was a pretty little girl with beautiful big eyes and glowing brown skin. Someone must be looking for you, he thought. Someone must be missing you. On their way back to the man's hut, the man walked over to a nearby field and picked some roots for the evening. When he made it to the hut, the man retrieved some water from his well and took some leaves from his small plot and cooked some soup for him and the little girl. While they ate, the man tried talking to the little girl, but it appeared that she did not understand him. She simply giggled at the man and continued eating. When they were finished, the man began to clean up and saw the little girl making herself comfortable on his bed. "No," the man exclaimed, refusing to allow what happened the night before to happen again. But the little girl quickly fell asleep. When the man finished cleaning, he took his cloth, laid it on the ground, and walked over to the little girl. As he began to move her, he was captivated by her innocence and loveliness. He then walked back to the cloth on the floor and laid down. Eventually, the man fell asleep. Years passed, and the poor man remained poor. Only now he had an extra person in his home. For some time in the beginning, the man had continued to look for the little girl's home, but he never found anyone that was missing a child. So the man kept the little girl and raised her. As the little girl grew, the man taught her how to speak his language and how to maintain their small plot of land and care for their home. Growing up, the man did have a mother and a sister, so he did have some knowledge and experience of how to care for a girl, and so he taught her how to care for herself to the best of his abilities, and the man did well. And every day, they would eat the same meal, she would sleep on the same old bed, and he would sleep on the same cloth on the same floor. Sometimes the man would feel bad that he did not have a lot more to offer the girl. He sometimes would even suggest that it would be best for her to live with someone else. But the girl told the man that she was happy where she was. She even began to call the man her father, although the man told her not to. "I am not your father," the man would insist. "Why would you want a poor man like me to be your father anyway?" he asked. The girl, now some years older and more mature, would giggle. "Because, father," she would answer, "no other man or woman, rich or poor, would have done a better job raising me. You took me in when you had no room. You managed to feed me when there was little food. You raised me, played with me, loved me, and taught me when it was not your obligation. You let me sleep in your bed, sit on your stool, and read your books. You let me into your life after you were accustomed to being alone for so long. You are indeed my father." The man, now old, scoffed. "Huh." Time continued to pass, and although the girl was appreciative of all that she had been given, she did dream like every other girl would dream. Reading the books of the old man's collection gave her ideas of fantasies. Although she was older and more mature, she would still play by herself as her father did his chores. She would pretend that she was a princess. She would pretend that her hut was a castle and that the small plot of Sokoyokoto was her land. When she and the man would go to the marketplace, she would ask for bracelets and beautiful clothing, but the man could not afford it. She would, of course, understand and humbly stopped asking. As the girl became older, she began to feel that she was meant to do great things. One day, she told the man what she felt. "Father," she said, "have you ever felt like you were meant to do great things?" "I knew this day would come," the man said. "I knew that you would eventually see that there is nothing for you here and that you would want more and want to leave." "I don't want to leave," she exclaimed. "I simply was wondering. I would never want to leave you. You gave me everything. Why would I want to leave you?" Early one morning, there was a call at their hut. When the old man went out, he saw a group of men dressed in the richest of clothing. When the man asked what the men wanted, the men explained that many years ago, a princess was lost. She was the daughter of a king from the Far East region who was touring the lands at the time. While visiting the many neighboring regions, the little girl had disappeared. They had spent many years looking for her, but due to the vast size of the regions, they were unsuccessful. The king had passed away, making a final wish for his subjects to continue looking for his daughter and to bring her home to her kingdom. When the girl came out of the hut, the men immediately bowed, noticing her remarkable resemblance to her mother, the queen, who had also died many years before. The men then quickly took hold of the man, accusing him of kidnapping. The girl stopped the men and explained their story. After understanding the girl's story, the men released the old man and insisted that the girl come home, but the girl refused. The men then laughed. They could not understand why she would want to live in such poverty, knowing that there was a great kingdom awaiting her. The old man then said to the girl, "Go, It is what you have always wanted. Remember when you asked me about feeling like you were meant to do great things? The old man asked. This is it. You were meant to be a princess. The girl thought for a moment. She then turned to the men and said, I will go. When the poor man heard the girl say that she would go, he felt immediate heartache. Still, he understood. He always knew that the girl was not his to begin with, and that one day he was going to have to let her go. But I am bringing my father with me, she said. Surprised, the men refused. Your father was the king, not this man. Then I will not go, she said. The king is no longer alive, and this man raised me like his own, so I am not leaving him. But what about your kingdom? The men asked. The girl thought. Deep inside, she always wondered what it would be like to have a great kingdom. It was something she had only read about in books, and it could now be a reality to her. Then, to the girl's surprise, her father said, I am not leaving my home. This has been my home for many years, and although it is poor and small, it is mine. It was meant for me, and I am not leaving it. Knowing that there is a much better place for the child, the man, holding back his tears and his sadness, then said, Child, go to your home. Go to your kingdom that is given to you. Go to what was meant for you. The girl tried to argue, but the old man interrupted. Go, he yelled. This was not your home in the first place. I raised you, kept you fed and alive so that you could live for this moment. Now go. Understanding the sentiment of the old man, the subject in charge took hold of the girl and said, You will have much more in your kingdom, princess. In due time, you may even come back, but there is nothing here for you. He then turned to the poor man and said, Old man, we thank you for caring for the princess. We leave you 2 goats and 14,000 shells. Please be in peace. Speechless, the girl went with the men. When the men left with the child, the man went into his hut and silently sat. When night fell, he stared at the bed where the girl he accepted as his own child had slept. He then took his old cloth, rolled it up, and placed it under his head and rested on the floor. He could not sleep, for he was too sad. Hours later, in the middle of the night, there was a noise outside his hut. At first, the man ignored the noise, thinking that it was just the wind. Then there was another loud noise that finally caused the man to go outside. When the man went outside to investigate, he saw nothing. He then went back inside. He then heard a noise again, but this time the noise was much louder. When he went outside to look around, he could not find anything that could be making the noise he had heard. Then he walked around his hut, and he heard footsteps. When he heard the footsteps, he walked around the hut to follow them. As he walked faster, he heard the footsteps move faster, and the faster he walked, the faster the footsteps he heard became. He then began to run and saw a shadow. He began to chase the shadow. When he began to chase the shadow, he heard a giggle. The man then stopped, and he began to cry. But his cries were not of sadness, they were of joy. He then heard the giggle again. He then began to chase the shadow again, and he heard the laughter and playful scream of a young girl. Finally, he stopped and turned and began to run the other way around the hut. With a great big smile and tears of joy, the man saw his daughter running towards him with her arms wide open. He then opened his arms and gave his daughter a great big hug. But why? Why did you come back? The man asked. Because, Father, I am your princess, and this is our kingdom.